Japan and United States were allies for many decades. So how did things get so bad between them? It all comes down to oil. Japan is an island nation with few natural resources, and it was a huge problem to build its empire. Japan needed to get more resources like iron, coal, and oil. It was 1931 when Japan took its first major step by invading the Chinese province of Manchuria. In 1937, Japan invaded China. 3 years later, Japan invaded the French colonies of Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos. The emperor followed the example of Hitler and Mussolini. And expand his power by invading the French Indochina in July 1941. This time, US responded by freezing the Japanese assets in the US. And of course, this prevented Japan from purchasing oil. Meanwhile, and in July 1941, the President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared trade embargo on oil. Japan was relied on imports of oil for 90% from the US. A total war was a must. And the US fleet in the Pacific must be destroyed. And then occupy Southeast Asia. In a total radio silence, 6 Japanese aircraft carriers with a dozen warships launched from the Japanese coast heading to Pearl Harbor. On board of the Japanese carrier, it was the last minute before taking off. A wave of 183 warplanes take off, and it was followed with another wave of 170 aircrafts. The Americans believed that the water of Pearl Harbor is shallow for the torpedo attack. But the Japanese had created a brand new kind of torpedoes specially designed for the water of Pearl Harbor. And it had a devastating effect. Most of the American aircrafts and airfields were completely damaged. This is short simulation for what happened in Pearl Harbor from the movie Pearl Harbor. The losses of Pearl Harbor were 21 ships, 300 aircrafts, 2,400 Americans. Ten hours after the attack of Pearl Harbor, Japanese bombers appeared over Clark Field in the Philippines, its American air base in Southeast Asia. 45 minutes later, most of the American power in the region had been destroyed. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle was the best pilot in the U.S. Navy. Doolittle was officially assigned by the American president to carry out an operation inside the Japanese territory. it was a challenging mission. Target is Tokyo and other industrial centers around Japan. Objective, take out factories and munition plants and demoralize enemy inside their homeland. Strategy, attack with 16 B-25 bombers launched from USS Hornet. 16 days after leaving, the Hornet is within a striking distance of Japan. At 8:20, the first B-25 is taking off with Colonel Doolittle. The raid left a massive destruction. Several hours later, the raiders crossed the China Sea and were ready to land on China. There were no place to land. Therefore, they make a very rough landing on the rice fields. Most of the raiders were back home safely. Back to America, they received a huge welcome. Doolittle is promoted to general and became a national hero. A devastating war began in everywhere. This situation continued until Japan embarked on an adventure that cost it heavy losses when it attempted to seize Midway Island. Farewell moments for children and wives before their parents and husbands go to Midway Island. The Japanese attack of Midway was a disaster, and the Japanese Navy lost 4 of his finest carriers. It also lost about 2,000 sailors. In Trinity, in New Mexico, America succeeded in achieving the first nuclear blast. In August the 6th, a B-29 had launched from the base Tinian in Mariana Island, carrying an atomic bomb with a name called Little Boy, heading to Hiroshima in Japan. The B-29 dropped the bomb and the city was destroyed entirely, with thousands of casualties. 3 days after Hiroshima, another B-29 launched from the same base, loaded with a bigger atomic bomb with a code name Fat Man, and was heading to Nagasaki. It's impossible to determine the exact number of victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. However, estimates could give a number of 120,000 victims. Soon after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and in August the 14th, 1945, Japan declared an unconditional surrender. On board of the Missouri, the ceremony of signing on the surrender treaty took place. With the existence of the Japanese Prime Minister and representatives from the Allies. And thus, the World War II was ended in the Pacific and in Asia.